Hi, lovely ones. Sharon Raji Maynard here, and I'm with Lisa Marshall. We are looking at how we can be together, sharing especially experiential wisdom to deepen the roots, the inner connections we have, really down in Gaia like trees. But deep roots is what it's all about. So, welcome, welcome, Lisa. Glad to see you here today.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having me, Sharon. I'm excited for this conversation.
I
Yeah.
am too. I want to tell all the women who are going to be listening to this and men too. I met Lisa through a previous book of hers called, and you'll love the title, Speak the Truth and Point to Hope. I mean, tying those two together, I don't know that it had been done before. Point to Hope. And it was a leader's journey, and it was incredibly invaluable, and it's still valuable. So
Well,
it's been
thank
a
you.
few years, since you've published anything. Not that you haven't been doing what you've been doing to enrich the world, but here you are now with your next book, and I'm going to hold it up here, and it's this book, Yin, and it says, completing the leadership journey. Can you believe that? So Lisa, tell those who are listening, our wonderful fellow human beings in whatever male or female or whatever bodysuit they happen to be in, leadership journey going from point to hope. Speak the truth, authentic, right? And point to hope. And now this one. Tell us a little
About
bit about.
about 5 years after I'd published Speak the Truth and Point to Hope, I was spending some time with a teacher of mine, a man named Hayemio Storm, who is Native American and had written a book many, many years ago called Seven Arrows that was very pivotal to my understanding of, or my growing understanding of the world. And it was, in fact, the first gift I ever gave my spousal unit of now almost 50 years. And I didn't know Storm was teaching at that time. I got introduced to him much later, and he looked at Speak the Truth and Point to Hope and said, "This is a good book, Lisa, but you need to write a book on leadership for women." Well, I was a little flummoxed, frankly. I thought I'd written a book about leadership for everybody. And it took me a very long time to figure out what he meant. But in 2020, with the convergence of Black Lives Matter, the Me Too movement, the pandemic, and me recovering from knee surgery, it all came together for me in a really powerful way. And I realized something I hadn't been able to figure out before. I used Joseph Campbell's model of the hero's journey as the structure for Speak the Truth and Point to Hope. And occasionally women would come to me and say, does that really apply to us? I sort of think that's for the boys, it's not. And my answer always had been, and I still think this is true as far as it goes, well, if you're not the hero in your own story, who is? There's something wrong with that. So suddenly I realized there was a different answer, which is that the female version of it. And again, very early on, I went from using male female language to using yin yang language, in part because this conversation that we're in these days about masculinity and femininity has gotten so polarized that it's pretty toxic. And I want a different framework to talk about those kinds of energies in the world. And yin and yang really fit that very nicely for me. And they're different enough that they kind of interrupt people's patterns of thinking about things. So the yin journey is different in that it is rather like yin biology, interior. You don't see much of it on the outside. Yang Journey is exterior. You go out to get the golden fleece, you slay the dragon, whatever. And just the way Yang biology is exterior, it's hanging out there. So I took that concept of the interior journey and said, what's the purpose of it? And realized, thank you, social revolutions all over the world, the Yin journey is to find our voices, and that's an interior process. It's not an exterior process, and it means coming to grips with all the things we're afraid of. Yin is the stuff that nobody wants to talk about. It's dark and it's wet and it's messy and it's not organized and you can't find your way easily, and it's just like what grows under the trees, all that dark stuff. They now say like maybe 80% of living biomass on this planet is under the ground. So the planet itself is profoundly yin. And once I had this sort of huge aha moment, I sort of got taken over. This was a very different writing process than any I've ever had before. Typically, you make an outline and you go through it and This was not like this. This was, you'll love this, Sharon, circular, spiral, I would say, because I kept coming back to the same points, but realizing more and more. I've never written something so iteratively. I think the first thing was 12 pages, and then it was 20 pages, and then it was, It was a really different kind of process. And I often found myself thinking, well, there's more to be said there, but I don't know what it is. I'll have to sleep on it. Sleep, by the way, is very yin. And so I felt my way through this. It was not a thinking process. It was a feeling process. And as I say in the book, there's a reason so little's been written about yin. It's damned hard to write about. It's really complex and mysterious and requires language that we mostly don't have. So it took me probably a year of just, again, iterating over and over and over. It's not a real big book, but I like to think of it as a bouillon cube. It sort of will dissolve in your psyche over time and spread the flavor. One of my friends said, well, you're not putting many examples in there, Lisa, and people need to see examples in order to learn. And I found myself incredibly resistant to that idea. And when I dug into why I was resisting it so much, I realized, because if I'm giving examples, I'm doing what Yang always does, which is I'm not listening to people's own words. I'm telling them what they should think. And so I ended up writing it as a workbook, hence the spiral binding, so that it can lay flat on your desk. And at the end of every chapter, there are questions. Some people like to read the whole book and then go back and answer the questions. Some people like to read a chapter, think about it, write about it. One person commented, those were not questions I had ever thought of asking, and they're all really valuable. So what I'm trying to do is make the book be helpful for people finding their own voice. And the thing about finding your voice is that even when you think you've found it, it's an onion. You can peel another layer off and find a deeper, richer, more resonant way to say things. And that was the experience of writing this for me, is I kept peeling the onion. And that's the experience I'm hoping people can have reading it and working with it, which is that they get to peel the onion of their own story. And we all live in stories, whether we like to pretend otherwise or not. But when you find that kernel of your voice in your story, then what to do, how to do it, where to do it, when to do it, all those questions become quite manageable, if not dismissible, because the voice is there. And that's the real authentic you showing up in the way you need to show up in the world. And that was a long answer, so now I'll shut up.
Oh, but that was great. What is interesting about that? I'm going to say a couple of things that are interesting to me about it. I work with a lot of circles of women, and right now they're going. A lot of them are being drawn inwardly, just naturally inwardly, and so here we are at this point in our history here in the United States, but globally, where women's voices have been discounted. We have been, in various ways made to feel like we have to obey somebody else's voice, and it's not working for us anymore. And there's a large uprising, and yet how do you take the uprising, which is often fueled by anger and frustration, which is a woman's way when she wakes up? She's going to be a little bit angry. And for me, what has been missing in the past is the path to clarity, because clarity is the strength, and clarity is what? It's not the clarity of the anger, it's the clarity of your voice, of who you are. And because you know who you are, like you say, when you know who you are and you begin to expect, read, write, talk from that place, you design a whole different life. Another way I've seen it called is in the ancient Hermetic tradition, it's the sun path. You're not listening to somebody else's voice, following blindly. You may have had a voice that helped you wake up, but at some point, the real mastery comes from your sun path, you. And so this book, did you publish it last year? How long has it been out, Lisa?
December of 2020.
Yeah,
So it was,
it's
I do feel like it's right on time.
it is right on time. It is right on time. And how many of us who haven't, even those of us who have done some inner work and we think we've got our voice, and we have to some degree, again, what will happen to women when they look at other questions they hadn't thought about before and go deeper? What
Yes.
will happen to our world when women
Yes.
go deeper? It's the perfect time.
And one of the things I realized in writing it is that there's all this talk about getting back to normal, and it's still, we're all about getting back to normal. And normal wasn't so great. In fact, normal was toxic for many, many, many people. And we're not going to get back to that completely. I mean, we've certainly disproven some of the, well, this can't be done. We proved it overnight. You can't work from home and have a productive organization, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so we know that a lot of things that we had been being told for years simply weren't true. And we've got to go further in imagining a new and different normal. So the last quarter of the book is really my description of the world I think we need to get to if we're not going to throw this planet into a completely apocalyptic collapse. It's not the only one. I am actually always asking if people want to write a different one. I will cheerfully publish it on my website. I think we need a lot of new and different notions of future possibilities so that we're not so knee-jerk in our responses to that'll never work, that can never happen, blah, blah, blah. we have to imagine something different if we want there to be something different. And my version of pointing to hope in this case was painting a picture of a world that is very different than the current one. I want to invite all your listeners / viewers, if you read that and think, oh, no, that I don't like that world, great. Get in touch and write me a different one. I will happily publish it. We need these alternatives if we're going to get unstuck from this desperate, let's just get back to normal, that is so unhealthy for us.
I really applaud you for that, because that's really true. Because as women wake up, and I'm not saying that anything that men couldn't, shouldn't, ought not to, but I think women are key. I think we were always the one to design the culture. In other words, policymakers, and be the leaders, and not power over, but power with. And in that, we have to be able to hear each other's words as we interpret what future ought to be or could be, which is multifaceted, and it can be this and this and this, you know,
All at the same time.
all at the same time. And
Yes.
oh, that's really great. And it occurs to me what I've seen in my work with women, and I've been doing it for like 30 years, and mainly in a healing capacity or mentoring capacity, that this last 2.5, 3 years, which is COVID, is a part of that, but then we have, other things that are going on too, have really shaken humanity, I think, to the core, in a massive, all of a sudden, let's clap the blinders off and wake up, because we've normalized toxicity, we've normalized capturing and domination, so we're waking up. There are a lot of women I see and interact with that it's like all of a sudden the blinders are off, and they're struggling in a different way than some of the others who we took the blinders off years ago. So it's not a big surprise, still more work to do, still more who am I? So it's a different level of awareness.
Mm-hmm.
But what I see in this book, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, because those who are going like, what in the heck happened, and where do I fit, and who am I, and oh my gosh, my box is just blown apart. They don't have to, they can grab hold of Yin and start looking at some of the questions that will lead them to answers from within them, as well as those of going like, okay, I'm on it, we've got more work to do, but they need to also have the opportunity to deepen with questions, inner work. So it's a book totally appropriate at whatever level of awareness or pain or struggle or excitement or creativity you might find yourself in. And
Thank you.
I just really applaud this book. Um, and I loved your first book too. So, absolutely. Yes, yes. So, what are you finding within those women who find you? And maybe you work with men too, but what are you finding?
I'm finding what you said. I actually thought that I wrote this book for young people.
Oh, interesting.
And my girls, I don't write knowing who my audience is. I write because something's coming through me. And it's not actually a choice. It's like, oh, I'm supposed to be doing this now. All right. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. Whatever. I'm on it. And I have 2 daughters, very fabulous young women, and they kept saying, "Nah, we don't buy it, Mom. Who's the audience? Who's the audience? Who's the audience?" And I finally realized that the audience, and again, it's not, how do I want to say this? It's not just This is not an age specific description or awakenedness specific description, but as I said, it's for young people who were told that there was no bias when there was. Well, that can be older women too. For those who, for whom full equality and opportunity was promised but not delivered. Those who were promised a level playing field economically, only to find it was a sham, it was a charade. Those who were discovering that being one of the guys was a shallow victory that cost far too much, cost, in fact, their voice. Well, it turns out that those descriptions fit all the way up and down that spectrum you're talking about.
Yes.
Sharon. And I just want to make one additional comment, which is that I've also been fascinated by the fact that when women's voices get unleashed, what they speak for or who they speak for is Gaia. They speak for Mother Earth. When you look at the demonstrations around environmental issues, if you just want to entertain yourself by counting the males and the females in those pictures, the women outnumber the men 2-1, 3-1, 4-1. They're the ones who are feeling this. It's no accident that almost all of these young, incredibly brave, incredibly powerful voices like a Greta Thunberg, who are calling us to account for our failures, are female. So part of what we've lost in the last, and you can debate the history here, 5,000 years, 10,000 years, whatever it was, since we stopped listening to people who listened to the land and started thinking we were smarter than they were, all of that, what we've lost is the balance. And we are now living in a profoundly young, dominant world. And I'm not, as you said earlier, it's not about hating on the men. It's not about that they can't do it, but we've got to get back to a balance where yin is spoken for and about and with as intensely as yang is spoken for and about and with. And if we don't do that pretty soon, we're going to be living on a pancake, not on a planet.
It reminds me of an interview I did again, probably close to the time when I first interviewed you. And I think it's important that we understand that, your voice isn't alone. My voice isn't alone. And there was a researcher, Valerie Hudson, who her group, she was at the BYU at the time, but she was a PhD, and they wanted to know what was happening in those places where the balance was going toward male babies being born at the expense of female babies being, no, we're not going to have them. And so they did research back in time, and very, very extensive research, and they wrote it into a book called Bare Branches. And they found that any society, no matter where it was that they found it, any society that was unbalanced toward the yang was very assertive, aggressive, militaristic domination. And that doesn't mean that is a bad thing, but when it's unbalanced, it is bad. It doesn't help.
Right.
But what really surprised them, that they came to the conclusion that you could absolutely predict the security, whether it was a village or a country or any group. You could predict the security, the safety of that group by the way the females were treated and included.
Wow.
And
Wow.
and I think that's profound, and it's like what you said, but there's research backing it up. Over years and years and years of time. So is it important for those of us in female bodies to, explore ourselves. And this is a great way to explore ourselves in groups. I mean, book groups, explore ourselves so that we can say, well, what is my voice? Well, is that really my voice, or is that just a residue of what was dad's voice or mom's voice? Um, you had a teacher early on that was Native American in Seven Arrows, and way early on, before I even knew what I was doing, actually, I was in contact with a Native American filmmaker who'd gone around the world to different indigenous tribes all around the world looking for the predictions that were held in their tribes
Mhm.
and how they were common. It was very interesting, and I have not been able to find that his film. He previewed it. Afterward, I came up and he talked about some of the tribes, some young people in one of the tribes in Borneo, that the village had been decimated, and the bones of their ancestors I mean, the bodies were thrown into caves, and many of the children were then you know, put into other tribes. And when some of those young men at college age found themselves and they realized they were from the same village, they went back into the tribes, into the jungles of Borneo to live in those caves, to dream awake the bones of their ancestors.
Wow.
Talk about sleep. So I went up to him afterward, because that was so profound, and he looked me in the eye and he said, when are you going to dream awake the bones of your ancestors? And I looked at him like, what are you talking about? I was raised in a patriarchal system. I didn't know that the bones of my maternal ancestors were so smashed and diminished. I didn't. But he said, I went, I don't know what you're talking about. He said, the women. And that's what you're doing.
Yes.
And you're encouraging all of us to do it in behalf of ourselves. So thank you so much for allowing this book and these words to come through you. And I want also my listeners to hear that it is not strange, weird, out of sight when you hear and feel and have sensations of something that is needing to be spoken or created. It is part of who we are as women to bring it into form. So, Lisa, how are you working with individuals now or groups, and how can people be in touch with you? And of course, this book is everywhere. I could say go to any bookseller, go to your website, but how can they contact you?
Okay, let me just say one thing. I did not put this book on Amazon, and I thought long and hard about that. It is carried by New Leaf, which is an independent bookstore distributor. It is carried on Smashwords as an ebook. But there seems something so profoundly contradictory about the ultimate young power of Amazon
Yeah.
and giving more money to Jeff Bezos that I couldn't do it.
Mhm.
The easiest way to get it is either to go to your wonderful local independent bookseller and ask them to order it, or to go to my website, which is yinjourney.com,
Mhm.
and order it there. Those two ways will get it to you pretty quickly. Or if you want an ebook version, then go to Smashwords and order it there.
Perfect.
I think it's just smashwords.com.
It is. It is.
And if you need to get hold of me, just go to info@yinjourney.com.
Mhm.
I am working with more and more women. I've always had a lot of male clients, and they've always turned out to be the ones, surprisingly enough, who were struggling with finding their voice in corporate settings. And that said, I am working more and more with women and young women, just helping them on this journey, helping them listen to their bodies, listen to what's in there, that honor the knowledge they already have, trust their intuitive wisdom. And for a lot of young people, just having someone with gray hair say, no, you're right, you're okay, that was spot on, that was a smart move, that, because it's not what they grew up with and it's not what they've heard most of their lives. So I'm happy to do that kind of work as well. And again, you can reach me at info@yinjourney.com if that's something that is of interest to you. I'm semi-retired, so I don't take a lot of new clients. But if somebody who's in one of your circles reaches out to me, Sharon, you can rest assured I will give them some very serious time and consideration. So
Yeah, yeah, we're holding hands with some amazing, amazing women, and you're one of them. So I so honor what you've done. I love what you've been doing, who you are, and how you are in the world. You hold a presence, and you have integrity to that presence, and you've just spoken to one of those pieces of integrity.
well, it confuses people because how can you write a book and not put it on Amazon? And I really wrestled hard with that, but ultimately I just seemed too out of integrity to do it. So
That's really such an important part of finding our voice. Then we begin to see where we're out of sync with ourselves. And when we're out of sync with ourselves, we don't have a signature on the planet. We're an artificial presence. It's important to get to ourselves.
yes,
Lisa, thank you so much. I know this isn't the only time we're going to be bumping shoulders.
I'm sure it isn't.
Uh,
Thank you for having me again. It was
Absolutely.
delicious as always.
As always, it's always wonderful.
All right.
Okay, and women, you see how this deepens your roots. I totally encourage you to do this kind of question asking with yourself, with others around you. It's a delicious journey too.
Let me just add one thing, that if people want to do a book group,
Mhm.
I'm happy to join in. So if your audiences want to form small groups to read and talk about the book and want some input from me, that is something I'm perfectly willing to do. So
That's a great idea. Thank you for that offer.
yeah. All
Okay,
right.
until we meet again, and it won't be very,
Thank you, Sharon. Be well.
be well, you.
Okay.